Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views. The time is 9:37, and this hour of News and Views is sponsored by African Muslims Agency. African Muslims Agency, a beacon of hope to communities for over 35 years in Africa and beyond. And as I mentioned before we went to the break, we're still getting those reactions from the breaking news that we got this morning. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh has been assassinated in Iran after attending the inauguration of the country's new president. And Hamas has blamed an Israeli airstrike for the death of his political bureau. And we'll be getting right now in a bit a reaction from Professor Jeff Halper about what this ultimately means, for Hamas as an organization, but also for those aspirations of finding a long-lasting ceasefire and peace negotiations between Hamas and the Israeli occupying forces. Professor Jeff Halper, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media.
Thanks for having me again.
I think, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh couldn't have come at the worst possible time. When you look at, the current status quo of what's happening between Hamas and the Israeli occupying forces, the peace negotiations in the area, are we ultimately going to see a breakdown of all of that? What's your thought?
Well, maybe you see something I don't see, but I don't see any peace negotiations at all. On the contrary, I think Israel sees itself in the unilateral process of simply nailing down its apartheid regime and its 130-year campaign to take over Palestine and transform it into a Jewish country called Israel. There are no peace negotiations. Israel has never talked really with the Palestinian Authority, which doesn't really represent the Palestinian people. There is no more PLO, even though there's an attempt in the grassroots in Palestine to try to revive it. And basically the United States and Saudi Arabia, we have to say, are the two key players that are in the process, as soon as the fighting in Gaza dies down, in the process of trying to normalize the situation, to complete the Abrahamic Accords that began with Trump. So I think Israel sees itself in a position of destroying the last bastions of Palestinian resistance and moving hundreds of thousands of Palestinians out of the country. Israel calls this Nakba 2. In other words, moving people out of Gaza through humanitarian means, of course, into other countries, and driving people out of the West Bank into Jordan and into the rest of the world. So there's no peace process. There are no contacts with any Palestinians, certainly, political bodies. The Palestinians have been completely excluded from this whole process by Israel and the United States, and actually the Arab world. And so that's, I think, the really serious thing. I think the assassination of Haniyeh is kind of a cap on this idea that we can defeat the Palestinians once and for all and legitimize our apartheid regime and really erase the Palestinian issue from the international agenda.
And as you speak on the Israeli occupying forces plan essentially of erasing the Palestinian agenda from the world's eyes, I want us to focus on the response from Hamas. Senior Hamas leader Abu Zari, he said we have entered into an all-out war for the liberation of Al-Quds. He said this in an interview with Tehran Times. From your observation, a response from Hamas, what would that look like? And also a succession plan. Who do you think might be the next in line to take over from Ismail Haniyeh?
Well, I think, Israel's assumption has always been this, is by far not the first political assassination. We can even go back to 1947 when before there was an Israel, the Jewish militias assassinated Count Bernadotte, who was the UN mediator. And since then, they've assassinated Palestinian leaders from all the factions, not from Hamas only. Of course, we have to understand that from Fatah, from the PFLP, I mean, everybody from Ghanafani, to many people think even Yasser Arafat was assassinated by Israel. Certainly confined to a basement in the Muqada in Ramallah, if we remember that. So Israel's assumption is that there is no legitimate Palestinian liberation movement. That, like I said, that this is unilateral, that we Israelis can take over Palestine, defeat the Palestinians, and get the international community led by the United States to accept an Israeli apartheid regime. And since there's no Palestinian legitimate political representation or even political position, we're free to assassinate all their leaders because they're simply criminals. We've criminalized Palestinian resistance, and we don't recognize that it's political. And so the assumption behind the assassinations is there is no real Palestinian political movement. It's simply a bunch of bad people. And if we can knock them off, if we can knock off the heads of all the terrorist groups, because Israel reduces, this political conflict and a legitimate conflict of Palestinians for liberation, and any kind of political negotiations, it reduces it all to terrorism. And that's, of course, what prevents any kind of negotiations at all. And if they're simply terrorists and they're not political and they're not legitimate and they don't represent a real liberation movement, you could just kill them. And so the assumption is that and we even have an expression in Israel, if you cut off the head of the snake, that's our expression, the snake will die. The idea is if you cut off Haniyeh, the head of Hamas, Hamas will die. If you cut off Arafat, the PLO will die or Fatah will die. If you cut off Kanafani, the PFLP will die. But it doesn't die. These assassinations have proved futile because, in fact, there is a Palestinian liberation movement and support of the Palestinian people. Of course, they have no choice, that will keep this going. And so I don't know who's going to replace Haniyeh. There is a political bureau. They're well organized. They have a whole pool of leaders that can come in. I think Haniyeh was very effective, and I actually feel sorry for his assassination, because I think it was a criminal act of assassinating a legitimate political leader. And don't forget, Haniyeh himself, his children were killed. Israel targeted his grandchildren and admitted that. So this is a criminal act of a political association on top of multiple criminal acts of killing his family, which is absolutely illegal in international law to target innocent civilians. But I think the basic assumption behind what Israel's doing, that if you cut off the head of the snake dies, is not going to happen. Not for Hamas and not for any other political faction of the Palestinians, because this is a legitimate, a long-lasting liberation movement that is going to continue and has to continue until Israeli apartheid and its colonial venture ends. How that ends, I don't know. I think the only way out is one democratic state over all of historic Palestine, in which everyone has equal citizenship, but that's kind of far away. So right now we're really in a situation where Israel thinks it can exterminate the Palestinian liberation movement, and we'll see, with the help of the United States and some of the Arab world, we'll see if that's the case or not.
And just how much, of an impact is Haniyeh's assassination going to have on Hamas itself as an organization? How much are they weakened, during these times? And also a response from, Iran. Are we in any way can hope for an aggressive response coming from them? This has happened on their soil. They've condemned the attack very harshly, but any tangible kind of response from this, is it expected?
Well, Israel's waiting for, there will be a response. There has to be some kind of response. How effective it is, I don't know, because Israel is so well defended, especially by American weapons. We have to remember this is an American bastion in the Middle East that's pursuing American and NATO agendas here. So it's an enemy not only of the Palestinian people, but of all the Arab and Muslim world, like Iran, that's trying somehow, whether you agree with their policies or not, that are trying somehow to overcome this neo-colonial background and take some control back of the Middle East, so the different countries and factions and groups in our region can begin to determine their own future rather than NATO and the United States and Israel. That's part of the battle. So I don't know if they can penetrate Israel itself. It could well be that there'll be reactions abroad where Israelis and Israeli targets are more vulnerable. Could be an Israeli embassy, and it could be, which I hope it isn't, innocent Israeli tourists somewhere, or synagogues, something like that is not that really degrades the struggle as well. So I'm not sure. There will be a reaction. Israel is certainly poised for a reaction. Whether it's going to be military or whether it's going to be more of this informal, outside kinds of attacks, that I really don't know. But the problem with this is, and I think this is Israel's intentions, the real significance of the assassination of Haniyeh is that it closes all doors to negotiations. I mean, Israelis are already saying the hostage deal is probably gone because Haniyeh was one of the people that was negotiating the hostage deal. But beyond that, I think Israel's trying to push it to a point where any Palestinian that's willing to talk to Israel and willing to compromise and willing to conceive of some kind of a peace agreement is seen as a danger and is eliminated, so that you get to a point where the hatred and the polarization is so great and there is no one on the other side to talk to because you killed them all, that then Israel feels that it's won, it's defeated the Palestinians, and it can move on. So I think that's the idea, is to prevent any kind of compromise or peace negotiations or any kind of response to the Palestinian need for some kind of freedom and some kind of self-determination. So I think Israel is intentionally closing everything down. So the only kind of interaction you can have in the Middle East is a military, violent one. And if that's the case, then Israel says, then we can win, because we can beat the Palestinians and we can beat Iran and we can beat Hezbollah. And so it's a win-lose idea, a zero-sum game, not anything that leads to some kind of a compromise or peace agreement or response to Palestinian needs.
I think we're going to leave it there. Prof. Jeff Halper giving us his reaction to the assassination of Hamas political bureau chief Ismail Haniyeh. Thank you so much, Prof. And I'm sure as more details arise from this, we'll definitely be getting in contact with you.
Thank you much.
Oh, there you have it there, Professor Jeff Halper giving us his reaction to Hamas political bureau chief Ismail Haniyeh's assassination. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be, getting more local. We'll be talking to the chairperson of the Spiritual Crime Prevention in Phoenix about an appeal for the collaboration between the Phoenix police and the community to address crime together. Maulana Mohammed Tariq, the chairperson of the Spiritual Crime Prevention Phoenix, will be joining us for that discussion.